like Martin Butzer, Theodore DeBeza, William Perkins, Isaac Watts, Jonathan Edwards, J.C. Ryle, D. Martin Lloyd-Jones, and Charles Spurgeon. So, for example, Ian Murray writes this about the Puritans. He says, from the first quarter of the 17th century, belief in a future conversion of the Jews became commonplace among the English Puritans, hardly dispensationalists. J.C. Ryle, who again is no dispensationalist but was a premillennialist, an Anglican, he wrote this, I believe that the Jews shall ultimately be gathered again as a separate nation, restored to their own land, and converted to the faith of Christ. So there are many theologians throughout church history, even those who would not in any way claim to be dispensationalists or even premillennialists, who see a future for Israel as an ethnicity and even as a nation state. But of course, on the other hand, many other believers, particularly from the amill and post-mill perspectives, although again, not all, would argue that the church is the spiritual Israel and has inherited spiritually the promises made to Abraham. And so there is no, in this position, no future for Israel as a geopolitical nation state in God's redemptive plan. And so, you hear these different views and these different positions, and you might think, okay, well then our eschatology and especially our view of the future of national Israel is really what leads us to have a position on how Christians ought to view Israel today. And of course, it is going to affect it to one degree or another. However, here is the critical point that I really want to make today. And it's a point that I believe that should unite all Christians who are submitting to the authority and sufficiency of Scripture and who understand the nature of progressive revelation and the outworking of God's plan through history. This is a point that should unite all of us regardless of our eschatological position. And here is the main point, that even if you view a future restoration of national Israel. You might be dispensational, you might be any of the variations of dispensationalism or even pre-mill or even some versions of amill and post-mill that see some sort of large ethnic gathering of Jews to Christ at the end of the age. Even if you believe that there is a future restoration of national Israel, even within those systems, that future restoration of national Israel only happens after Israel turns to Jesus as their Messiah and after he comes again. So even in a dispensational framework, the restoration of national Israel as a fulfillment of the Abrahamic covenant promises, if that's your view, even those things are not happening during this age and will not happen during this age. So if you're amill or post-mill and maybe you see no future for Israel, of course you believe that. But I'm speaking to those of you who hold to a dispensational position about the future of national Israel. Even if you hold that the nation of Israel will inherit the actual land promises promised to Abraham in Genesis, even within that system, it will only happen after Jews put their faith and trust in Jesus Christ and maybe do so on a national level, and the fulfillment of those promises will only happen after Jesus comes again. So in other words, there is no mainstream, even eschatological position that teaches that the current secular and largely unbelieving state of Israel is the final fulfillment of God's promises. There is no legitimate eschatological position that holds that, even, again, thoughtful, rooted in Scripture dispensationalists. That fulfillment is preceded, even within those systems, by salvation and inaugurated at the return of Jesus Christ. So again, I want to read here John MacArthur, who again is a staunch dispensationalist, still is if in heaven if you believe in dispensationalism. He taught this, and yet he's much more thoughtful than the left-behind popular versions. And he made some interesting comments about the status of Israel today. So this is John MacArthur, and he says this: Israel right now is not under divine protection. Remember, this is a dispensationalist. They are under the promise of God that they will be perpetuated as an ethnic people, so God's not going to allow all the Jews to be wiped out. But, MacArthur says, this current group of Jews that live in the world today and in the nation of Israel are not now under divine protection. Notice what he says here. They're apostate. If they don't believe in Jesus Christ, they're apostate. He says that. They've rejected their Messiah. They are under divine chastening. What does he mean there? Just like anybody who denies Jesus as Messiah is under divine chastening, so is unbelieving Israel today. But, again, as a dispensationalist, MacArthur says, but they are still a people and will be to the end. So this is a very important distinction. And again, I want to speak to those of you who you would consider yourself a dispensationalist or a premillennialist, or maybe just somebody who believes that God has a future for national ethnic Israel. Okay, that's fine. However, that will be fulfilled in your theological position. That will be fulfilled after Jesus comes again, and only when they put their faith and trust in Jesus Christ. Again, to restate this in another way, no biblical dispensationalist believes that a Jew who does not put his or her faith in Jesus Christ will be rewarded with the blessings of land and the promises of the Abrahamic covenant. No, it is only those Jews who put their faith in Jesus Christ as the Messiah. This is a very important, crucial distinction. Again, especially if you are dispensational or if you are premillennial. The next event on God's prophetic timetable, whether you are premillennial or amillennial, postmillennial might have some different variations here, but the next event on God's prophetic timetable is the return of Christ.